Okay, so I'm talking about some stuff that will benefit one of my trainees specifically. She's having difficulty with a few issues in her driving, but although it's tailored for her, I'm sure all of you will benefit from what we're going to be talking about. The first thing I'd like to do is touch on the difference between an experienced driver and a learner driver. Experienced drivers tend to drive differently in a number of ways. Firstly, it's the way they sit in the vehicle. Experienced drivers tend to lean with the vehicle into a corner. Learners, when they're first learning to drive, tend to sit very still and turn the wheel. But an experienced driver will tend to lean into the corner, just like as if you're driving a motorbike or flying a plane. They'll tend to lean into the corner. The other thing they tend to do is brace. So before they press the brake pedal, the muscles in their back, the muscles in their legs brace to offset the effect of braking. Learners, drivers, if you watch them when they brake, they tend to lean forwards. Experienced drivers tend to also see with their brain more. Learners tend to react to things which are directly in front of them, but experienced drivers use past experience to drive the vehicle. A good example of that is coming around a blind corner. A learner will get around the corner, see an oncoming vehicle coming towards them, or see a parked vehicle, then react to that and brake heavily and stop. Experienced drivers tend to think through the corner, so before they get round, they imagine that there might be a vehicle parked there, they imagine that there might be something coming towards them, and they'll come off the gas and they'll prepare for that even before they can see it. You don't really see with your eyes, you see with your brain. The brain can think much further than the eyes can see. So that's another thing that experienced drivers do. It's also the way they hold the steering and the way they blend the controls. When you're driving, you're only really operating two controls continuously, the steering left to right and the pedals slowing down or speeding up. In an aircraft, you control the aircraft in 4 or 5 dimensions at the same time, but with driving, it's only really 2, and it's how you blend those 2 controls. That's why somebody like Michael Schumacher or Ayrton Senna can do the job so much better than the rest of us, because they're blending 2 controls, but they're blending them really well. Learners tend to suffer from something called cross-coupling, where when they're doing one thing with the steering, for example, steering around a very tight corner, when they're reaching for the wheel, pushing and pulling, they tend to stamp the brake pedal, so we get heavy braking mid-corner. This can make the passengers fall over. Whereas experienced drivers will preload the controls, they'll go onto the brake pedal, they'll find the biting point, and then they'll concentrate on the steering. So they're preloading the controls smoothly as they're doing something else with the steering. Yeah? As I say, learners tend to suffer from cross-coupling, and they tend to brake heavily, or when they concentrate on the braking, they don't steer enough. But experienced drivers blend those controls a lot better. So it's blending the controls, it's seeing with the brain rather than seeing with the eyes, it's leaning with the vehicle, so their body, their muscles in their body, you're not just using your hands and legs to drive, you're using your back, you're using your hips, you're bracing yourself in the seat. And those are some of the fundamental differences between an experienced driver and a learner driver. Yeah? The other thing is prioritising situations. If you're driving down the road and there's a zebra crossing and there's a parked vehicle, a learner driver might start moving out for the parked vehicle and not really scanning the pavement on either side of the zebra crossing. They're not prioritising correctly. They need to be prioritising the crossing, because the chances of somebody running across the road, that situation is far more dangerous than if somebody opens the car door. You can avoid the car door by stopping or moving up, but if somebody's running out in front of your vehicle, you need to prioritise that. So it's prioritising things and holding things in suspense. Yeah. What I mean by that is, see the zebra crossing, realise that a child may run across the road from, I don't know if there's a school there or a park there or something, but don't forget about the parked vehicle. This is another thing learner drivers can't do as well. They can't deal with one thing, but hold the second situation in suspense. And as you get better, you're not just dealing with one thing at a time. You're seeing the zebra crossing, you're seeing the parked vehicle, you're seeing the traffic lights beyond that, and you're seeing the corner beyond that. You're seeing 3 or 4 problems at the same time, and you're holding all of them in suspense. Yeah? The other thing is waiting. I just said to you about if you've got a parked vehicle and a zebra crossing, you give the zebra crossing more priority. You weight it differently. So the parked vehicle isn't that important. The zebra crossing is. And through all of this, what experienced drivers do is they keep pedalling mentally. So they're seeing the parked vehicle, they're seeing the zebra crossing. As soon as they've dealt with that, they're now dealing with the traffic lights that are coming up and the corner. Whereas a learner driver will tend to switch off for a second. They'll have a mental rest. Yeah? And when you're driving down a busy high street, or you're driving, you know, through a busy meeting situation, the one thing you can't do is have a mental rest. You've got to keep pedalling mentally. So you're constantly looking for the next problem. Even while you're looking for the problem, you're constantly scanning the pavement for people that might cross the road. While you're doing that, you're constantly thinking about bridges. You've got to think in 3 dimensions. When you're driving a bus or a lorry, unlike a car where you're just thinking about, will it fit through that gap? Now you're thinking about, will it fit through the gap? What happens if somebody opens the doors? When I get through the gap, when do I steer because of the length of the vehicle? You can't just steer straight away. You have to wait for the back wheels to pass the parked vehicle before you steer in. That's the 2nd dimension. So width is the 1st dimension, length is the 2nd dimension. And while you're doing all of this, you're asking yourself, that tree on the left there that's leaning over, if I steer into the curb to allow the oncoming vehicle through, is the roof going to hit the tree? So you've got to think in 3 dimensions. There have been a number of accidents where drivers or engineers have hit low bridges and ripped the roof off buses, especially at night time, because at night time when it's difficult to see through the rain or see through the snow and the roads are badly lit, you're struggling just to see the curbs, you're struggling just to position the vehicle, it's easy to forget to think in 3 dimensions and miss a low tree or a low bridge. But obviously that can be fatal. So those are some of the differences between experienced drivers and learner drivers.